Welcome to the podcast Scattered, One Person's Search for the Story Behind Human Remains. My name is Yvonne Chorlin. I'm a physical anthropologist and archaeologist. In other words, I like dead people. In this podcast, I explore topics related to dead people, from searching for human remains in forensic contexts to mortuary practices in modern and archaeological contexts, and everything in between. I offer information, perspectives, and insights directly from the mouths of researchers, as well as experiences of people who work with remains. All of this aims to provide you with information on subjects that aren't really talked about, don't seem to be a priority, or they can be very misunderstood. I hope you enjoy. Welcome back to the Scattered Podcast. It's been a while since the last episode. I have to record this very quickly because Calgary's experiencing its annual heat wave, which means I have air conditioners and fans and everything going on, but I've currently shut them off so I can make a decent recording, which means that my home is going to get very warm very quickly. So, update. What has been going on since I last brought you an episode back in April, and it's now July. What up? Well, just because you haven't seen a podcast doesn't mean that there hasn't been stuff going on. Number one, the scavenging study has more videos. So if you liked the ones from the year before, I have more from the year after. So from 2022 to 2023, those videos are now up. We replicated for the Edmonton area and the Calgary area. So go check those out. They are on my website, yvonnechorlin.com/scavenging-study. So go check them out. Tell me what you think. They're also, they're all available on YouTube, and you can find the list on my website, again, at yvonnechorlin.com/scavenging-study. We won't be putting out any more pigs this year, from as far as I know. It's more of a writing year and kind of, getting ourselves sorted and figuring out what to do next. Including in that is I am looking at figuring out a way to map the dispersal of the remains in a way that I've always thought is possible, but lots of people are telling me it's not possible. So I aim to prove them wrong. So I'm going to be going out with some people here at the end of the month to figure out if we can actually do it with a total station or a drone or some way, gather that data and be able to overlay it on top of topography or vegetation or all these lovely GIS type software and layers to see what we can get. So that's coming up at the end of the month. I will let you know how that goes. Next up, I was on Andy Mort's The Gentle Rebel podcast. So if you are maybe a little bit neurospicy, if you think you are a multi-potentialite, if you maybe are a highly sensitive person, maybe check out Andy's podcast. Again, it's the Gentle Rebel podcast. We had a chat a few weeks ago, actually might be more of a couple months ago now. Time's getting away. And we talked about how I've kind of found my own unconventional path in being a multi-potentialite and a highly sensitive person. So if you are interested in that, I will put the link in the show notes and go check it out. Andy is a lovely person and he has a very lovely podcast. I really enjoy listening to it. So do check it out at the Gentle Rebel podcast. So I mentioned just a few minutes ago that it's kind of a writing year this year. And that's not just for the scavenging study, because we're still pulling together the second part of the two-part article series. The first part we published last year, and it was on the scavenger guilds. And this year we're pulling together the data to put out a second part, this one on the dispersal of the remains. So that's still in progress. But in the meantime, I've also been writing up a sequel to the memoirs of a reluctant archaeologist. Elise Marquette, the main character of that novel, is going to be, I'm shooting her out into space. It's 10 years into her future. It's a bit of an alternate timeline. So we have a space travel. We still have the Indiana Jones movies and some other things. So you can recognize it. But yeah, it just kind of came out of the blue. I started writing in April, and suddenly I have a first draft. So if you like Elise from that novel, Memoirs of a Reluctant Archaeologist, then you might like this new novel. When is it going to be out? When can you get it? I am a bit of a slow writer. So even though I managed to pull together a first draft in 3 months, which is highly unusual for me, it might take me another year or so to actually do the revision and get it to a point where you, lovely reader, could read it. But stay tuned. I will let you know, and I would greatly appreciate anybody who wants to read it to let me know. Say that you're excited, because those are the kind of cheerleading type words that writers thrive on. Last and certainly not least, a former interviewee on this podcast, Sasha Reed. Her television series, Sasha Reed and the Midnight Order, has now gone live. It is on Hulu, and I can put a link in the show notes about where that is. I was very honored and privileged that Sasha found the time and was able to talk to me about databases and her experience in putting together the serial killer database and also the missing and murdered database. So check out her new series. Again, it's Sasha Reed and the Midnight Order on Hulu. And you can check out Sasha's episode on this podcast, episode 26, where we talk about databases. If you find this podcast and the information in it useful, please do consider supporting the podcast by donating. I now have 2 platforms, Buy Me a Coffee and Patreon. I finally did it. I started a Patreon account. There's not a whole lot in there. I'm sorry if you go look. There's not a whole lot in there, but give me time. I promise I will put stuff in there. Through Buy Me a Coffee, you can donate the cost of a coffee, $5 or $10, and the money goes directly to me to support my time, as well as the Patreon account. My time on this podcast is significant, which is why sometimes it can take me months to put together an episode. I spend a lot of time reading journal articles and books to find interviewees and to stay current in the fields of bioarchaeology, forensic anthropology, and many other disciplines. I also do the post-production of this podcast. I am host, producer, writer, editor, you name it. I do it. And so if you enjoy this podcast, please do consider buying me a coffee or donating through Patreon, becoming a Patreon member. The link is in the show notes and also on my website, yvonnechorlin.com. I am open to questions. Please do feel free to reach out and ask me a question. I would love to hear from you. You can reach me at my website, yvonnechorlin.com. You can email me at ychorlin@gmail.com or contact me through my Facebook page, The Reluctant Archaeologist, or through Instagram at Yvonne Chorlin. You can also comment on the podcast through my website or YouTube, and you can reach out and tell me what you think of the show and what you're learning about dead people. And now here is the interview. All right, so Ingrid, I'm going to get you to introduce yourself because you know you best, and then you can say your last name for me too, so I won't mispronounce it.
So my name is Ingrid Muhlig, and I'm the manager of DNA operations for the National Center of Missing Persons and Unidentified Remains. So NCMPUR. We, the RCMP, we like our acronyms, so it's NCMPUR. I will try my hardest not to fall back into all the acronyms, but by all means, stop me and ask me what it is if I do say one.
And do you know what? That's exactly what I thought when I was writing up the little, sort of outline of what we could talk about. I'm like, is what I'm talking about what I think I'm talking about? Because there's a lot of acronyms going on.
Yeah.
All right. So tell me a little bit about your role. You're a manager of a big unit, it sounds like.
It's actually a very small unit. So it consists, the National Center for Missing Persons and Unidentified Remains is actually a unit of approximately 20 people. But those of us that are responsible for the National Missing Persons DNA program, there's 2 of us that I'm the manager. I have and also a DNA analyst who does the authorizing of DNA and she will speak with the investigators and go over the files, make recommendations. So our side of the house, it's the National Missing Persons DNA program is actually um, we're partnered with the NDDB to steward this program. So
NDDB.
so National DNA Data Bank.
All right.
Yeah. And so we take care of mostly the administrative items, logging the information about the case, making recommendations to the investigator, finding out what's available in regards to DNA, and getting an idea about the case to make those recommendations. And then the NDDB is accepts the submissions that we've authorized, and they'll process them, and they do the science stuff of processing the DNA and reviewing it, uploading it to CODIS, and then if associations occur, writing those reports. Those reports come back to NCMPUR, and we'll release them to the investigators, also to like the legislation. So the legislation that governs how we operate is under the DNA Identification Act. And the DNA Identification Act also states that, there has to be periodic reviews. So we really, on the NCMPUR side, we manage the life cycle of that DNA profile.
Okay, so if you could take me back a step.
Sure.
So in just my little preliminary my own little investigation of websites, because that's called research these days. It sounds like the DNA program is very new. It just started in 2018.
Right.
And it's part of the overall missing persons and unidentified remains unit.
It's a program within the National Center that it's one of the services we provide to investigators, medical examiners, or coroner's office. So the National Center for Missing Persons and Unidentified Remains is a national program, and it provides services to investigators, medical examiners, coroners across Canada. So we're really an assist, and we assist with different services, and one of those being the DNA program.
Got it. Okay. Now, from that perspective, just because I don't know who's listening out there and what they know, and it's something that I learned in talking to one of your colleagues from the Missing Persons and Unidentified Remains group, that things just don't happen like investigators find some remains, efforts are made to identify them, and they are, despite efforts, they are then classified as unidentified. So that doesn't just magically appear in your database. There's a process that the medical examiner or the coroner has to go through to then log that in the national database, correct?
Right. So typically when remains are located, they're immediately put into CPIC. And that all police agencies across Canada have access to it. They have the ability to search against it too. So if they have a missing person and want to search for potential remains, they have that capability within CPIC. What happens with our center in our database, we call it MCPUR, which is Missing Children, Persons, and Unidentified Remains. And I know you've spoken to Kevin about this database. What happens is when those investigators enter the remains into CPIC, it automatically feeds any body entries or any missing persons directly to our database.
Okay.
Then our database has some algorithms, which it starts doing comparisons of whatever has been entered into what's already in that database. And it continues to do comparisons to anything new that's added.
Okay. But the search in CPIC does have to be done.
The entry into CPIC does have to be done. And that is a requirement to participate in the DNA program. And, that's best practices that we preach to all police agencies and medical examiners, coroner's office, is that you need to enter your unidentified remains into this database.
Right. Yeah, there's many little steps that many people have to perform to kind of log
Right.
that entry in and get it recognized on the national level.
And it goes the same way for missing persons. We want the missing persons in right away. And our mandate is to improve these investigations. So we know when someone goes missing, the investigator might go and quickly put in the pertinent information that he has at that time. But as the missing person, as the days go by and we realize this is more of a long-term missing person, our recommendation is always to the investigator, go back and make a fulsome entry into that database, give us as much information as we can, so that automated searching is taking place in the background and they don't even see it, and it can provide some clues or some information, investigative leads.
All right. So with that kind of in mind, since the DNA program, the piece of it, is fairly new, 2018. What was going on before that kind of led to the development of the DNA program?
So in 2000, you had the creation of the crime scene index and the convicted offenders index. And I know at that time, we also had these humanitarian indices on the table that they wanted to bring forward along with those two indices. But there was a lot of privacy concerns, and we had to do a lot of privacy impact assessments. So the best way to move forward was to drop the humanitarian indices and move forward with those criminal ones, because that was very important to get moving on those ones. And then we brought in the humanitarian ones later once they passed those privacy impact assessments.
And what do you mean by humanitarian? Let's set up a definition on that.
Right. So what's happened is typically whatever's going into our indices. So you have the missing person index, you have the relative of a missing person index, and you have the human remains index. So we consider those three to be humanitarian. And what's being uploaded is cases that are non-criminal.
Got it.
And then although the missing person and human remains indices do get compared to the criminal ones, by law, we cannot compare the relative one against the criminal indices. So it stays on that humanitarian house, and it is never compared to any criminal indices.
Fabulous. So so we've kind of touched on how the data are gathered. And I mean, for the criminal or for the missing and the unidentified, but there are other ways that data can be gathered, correct? Depending on which indice you're looking at using, right?
So I'm not sure if I know what you're asking.
Investigators, coroners, and medical examiners can put in an entry in CODIS for a missing person or unidentified remains.
Right.
But then there's also other humanitarian.
So there's one called the voluntary donor index. And it kind of sits on the fence between the two, because it has to be in relation to a criminal file, or it has to be in relation to a missing person file. When it's in relation to a missing person file, that submission comes to us to handle. And typically, it's really what's happened. It's typically family that's pulled the information from maybe the National DNA Databank website. And what we tend to do is we try to steer them to make an entry into the relative of missing person index. Because when you put submission into that voluntary donor index, you have criminal jeopardy now. You're telling the RCMP that they can go ahead and search against the criminal indices.
Oh, okay.
So we'll steer them to the relative of missing person index if that's the proper index for them to be in. And that way they'll never be compared against those criminal indices.
Okay. That's important to know.
Yeah. We've had a few submissions and we're like, no, that's not where you want to be. You want to be over here.
Yeah. All right. I'm glad I asked that then. Okay. So the public can make a submission. I mean, to the right place. You guide them there.
Right.
if they have a missing persons that they're worried about.
The reality is we don't deal with the public.
Okay.
The public, because there has to be a missing persons investigation. The public should always go to the investigator of the file, and then if they're not sure about it, they can contact us, and we'll guide them through making that submission.
Ah,
Um, like some of these small detachments, they may handle a missing person case once in a blue moon, right? And then typically, larger detachments, like I think of Toronto Police Service or Niagara Regional, they have actual missing person units, right? Where
right.
that they have investigators. That's all they do. Well, we're very well versed with them, and they're very well versed with our our procedures. So
Right.
that's the difference. It's just the population areas and
Mhm.
the smaller population areas might not know about this. And although we deal with investigators, it's something the public should be aware of, that this is
Mhm.
a service available, right? And the DNA program, also to the NCMPUR manages that Canada's Missing website, and you can get more information about different services from that Canada's Missing website. And we also publish the missing persons or unidentified remains in hopes of receiving tips from the public on the different cases, and that's the public component to our unit. And the public there's like different addresses. You can go to Crime Stoppers, you can go right to the police of jurisdiction, or you can come to us and report information. That's that Canada Missing web email address.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's nice to be aware of these services because there's nothing like starting a service with all these good intentions and then nobody knowing about it.
Right.
Yeah, you don't want that. No.
No, no, doesn't look good.
Exactly, right. So have you seen on that note, do you know who's using it? Has there been an increase over the years? I mean, I'm guessing during COVID there was probably a bit of a slump in who used it. I mean, I don't know.
You know what? During COVID,
Uh-huh.
investigators were working back at the office.
Uh-huh.
It appeared like they had more time, and so they started pulling out these historical missing persons and started going
Really?
through them. So actually, during COVID, we had a bit of an uptick of you know historical ones because the investigators had the time to start pulling out these different investigations. So, and it's funny, police investigators are a fickle bunch. They want to see value for the effort they're putting into, and by all means, I agree with them. If there's no value, why are we doing this? Question why we were doing this, right?
Exactly.
And I knew when I started, if we start showing them the success and the associations, that they'll start being more active within the program. And definitely we've seen that. Like for our business model, we were expecting 1 to 2 cold hits a year, and to be now 5 years in and we're at 90 putative identifications that have been released, I think we've been very successful. So
That's pretty awesome.
yeah, for such a junior program, we are pleased with our success so far.
So I'm wondering if you can talk maybe about I'm guessing there was a bit of a backlog because there's this database or all this information entries for missing persons and unidentified remains. So there was already that in place
Mhm.
when this new unit came in 2018.
Right, and I think where you're going is these historical ones, right?
Yeah. Were you
So
able to tackle some of that?
well, and we tried. We thought it was going to be a lot easier than it was. It ended up being actually quite difficult. But
Oh,
what happened was we knew there were already missing person files that had already profiles existing for them because they had done them at the provincial level for them.
okay.
And we're kind of like, okay, we gathered all that information before the the database came into operation. And then when we became operational, we started calling for them. But the issue we ran into is there is a specific consent form for the NMPDP, the National Missing Persons DNA Program. So
Oh.
the investigators had to go back, find the family that had been sampled, get them to complete these forms so they could be submitted to national. And that's what I always say to the public also is I'm like, you may have given your DNA at one point, but if you don't remember signing this consent form, it's probably not at national. So another reason to go back to the investigator of the file and say, I would like my DNA put up at the national level.
Yeah, that consent, that's a key piece.
It's huge. Like Canada's
Yep.
we're very protective of our personal information, and nothing was going to be uploaded unless that specific consent form had been completed. So you run into hiccups too, where some of these cases are fairly old, so the people had to may have passed
Yep.
on. So then we had to go
Yep.
back to legal and find out what steps can we take. Can we still accept it based on what they previously signed? And so yeah, there's been a lot of learning curves for the program.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, sometimes I can imagine it can be really tough and frustrating, but at the same time, the spirit of why that is in place
Mhm.
and how important it is.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it has to be respected, right? And
Yeah.
it did cause a lot of work, and even like in the creation of the database, we looked at, hey, do we only accept profiles or do we take samples? And then at one point it was just profiles, and then it got changed, and we're like, no, we'll accept both actually, profiles or samples, knowing that not every province had the money to create profiles out of these DNA samples, right? So let's make it accessible to all provinces and territories. And now we're kind of realizing that existing profiles not great, because our technology is better now and we're able to do better profiles. And now we're going, not only do we do those STR profiles, we're doing YSTR, we're doing mitochondrial. So we actually
Ah.
need that sample to be able to do that further processing if necessary, right? So the messaging has changed over the years. We're kind of like, okay, samples, give us samples.
Well, I'm glad it only took you 5 years to
Yeah.
to figure that one out.
Uh,
Yeah, that's just it. I mean, technology has improved vastly in 20 years, and even in 5 years, it's changed. And yeah, how are we going
yeah,
to keep up with that?
yeah,
Yeah,
that's it. That's keeping up with it and keeping in our lane too. So
yeah, yeah. Yeah. Now, I know that you gave a presentation for the Canadian Association of Biological Anthropologists in October, and I missed your
I know.
presentation. I am well. There's only
Well,
one
they put me
flight
like very
from.
last or second last or
Well, it was on the Saturday, that's all I know, and there's only one flight per day from Winnipeg to Calgary, and it
really.
was during your presentation. So that was it. I had to be on it. So are there any tidbits in that presentation, that you can share here? Take home messages? Um,
You know what? My goal there was to kind of intrigue those who were coming into this field, because that's who we work with, forensic anthropologists throughout Canada, right, with the unidentified remains. And talking to the coroners or talking to different people, it's interesting how on the surface they kind of know about us, but they don't really know us in depth, right? So it was
mm,
kind of capturing their interest and and getting out there again, what the program does and how it can be used, right? So um,
mm,
even like for forensic anthropologists, a lot of times when remains are found, they're incomplete.
yes.
So, with the database, what's nice is we can retain that profile. We know it's been identified, but now we're just retaining it and comparing it to all other human remains that come in. So we can potentially identify further remains for that incomplete, unidentified, well, now they're identified remains. So that's one of the nice things about it, because when you get into arms, like if you get an arm bone, you, at least if you have a skull or a mandible, you have some teeth, you might be able to get a dental from it.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're dealing with a single bone, it's pretty hard to make that connection between the cases.
Or even a fragment of.
Mm-hmm.
You can tell it's human. It's definitely not animal. But okay, from there, where do you go?
Right.
Yeah.
And we're seeing more cases of burnt bones too. So,
Oh.
and that's where mitochondrial does come into play, where we
Mm-hmm.
have, although it's not as descriptor, not as,
Mm-hmm.
discriminative as nuclear, it at least gives us the capability of dealing with degraded remains. So,
Right. I'm guessing then, at least with mitochondrial DNA, you can exclude.
right.
Yeah.
YSTR and mitochondrial is great for excluding.
Right.
When you cannot exclude, it tells you it's that family, right? But it can't tell you within the family
Right.
tree exactly where they are. So you
Right.
now need that additional metadata to come in and help support that identification. So
Right. But at least then you've got a somewhat of a direction then,
right,
which is always helpful.
yes, for sure.
Yes. Now you did mention cost, and again, I don't know who might be listening to this, and everybody who has watched CSI, they think that DNA can just be, it's $5, you can get it on demand, and easy peasy, carry on. So
um,
let's dispel some of that myth, shall we?
yeah, I don't know our costs, unfortunately, like, because I'm not on that side of the house. I do know we did go through another lab, a private lab, for some profiling, and I think the STR was $450 or $500. And then
Okay,
it
so
was
that's
like,
much cheaper than it was several
yes,
years ago. It was in the
yeah,
thousands, and it could take months, if not years.
yeah. So thousands you're looking at now are for the genetic genealogy
Mm,
SNP profiles. So the YSTR, I think it was about 400 or 450. So to get an STR YSTR profile, I think it cost us $950 from a private
okay.
lab. So
And what's turnaround time? Because that would probably be non-priority, correct?
no, that was
Oh,
that was a quick turnaround, and I think
oh,
that's probably another. I think ours probably is for us to do is a bit cheaper because we do it on batches. So,
okay.
where they're doing just that one case, right? So I would
Hmm.
assume that our cost is a bit lower than that.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's the problem too. Like it's humanitarian, where we don't do priority, but I can
Mm,
bump things up the
okay.
queue when necessary. So, but our turnaround time, like we say, 30 to 60 days. 30 days. We aim for 30.
Okay.
60 days usually it happens if the bones are degraded and we need to
Hmm.
process it more than once.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's just it, because it is a destructive technique.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had one case where mom had provided us baby teeth of her missing son,
Oh,
and,
wow.
I'm a mom. I know how heart wrenching it is to have to give up something that you've saved like
Yeah.
that, right? So we were so happy because the lab was actually able to get a profile from the dried blood that was on the tooth. So we didn't have to destroy the tooth. We could
Yeah.
return it. Yeah. So
Oh,
you
wow.
have these little cheer moments here, like yes.
The technology has just come
Yeah,
so far.
it's crazy. It's crazy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned that you've 90 people identified in the 5 years.
Right. So we provided 90. We call them putative identification reports
Okay.
because in the end it's the coroner and the medical examiner that looks at everything between the information on the file and the
Mm,
DNA and the breakdown of the DNA, and they're the ones who sign off on the identification. So yeah, we've provided 90. We've had a few international ones. You might have read recently. Toronto Police Service had uh, uh, a lady who had been pulled out of Lake Ontario in 2017, and they tried every avenue to identify her, media releases and everything, and they resorted to genetic genealogy,
mhm.
and it led them back to Switzerland.
Wow.
So then Toronto came to us and we're like, we think she might be from Switzerland. So we were able to take the profile that we had in our data bank and go through Interpol and have it searched against the Switzerland database. And sure enough, it's identified someone who went missing from Switzerland.
That's amazing.
And you think of it like, I know I deal with the Yukon a lot, and that's majority of their people they have up there is a lot of tourists coming through, right?
Right?
You know,
Yeah.
Niagara too. So
Uh-huh.
yeah, so we have these areas where they're potentially, and we share a border with the U.S. So you know, there's a lot of times we want to do that search on the U.S. side too. So we have that capability, which is nice.
I just love that, you know what? Sometimes globalization works.
Yeah, yeah,
You can actually, call somebody up and say, "So, hey, I've got this missing, this person, unidentified person, and we've got the profile. Can we ship you
yeah,
the profile and you guys take a look over there?"
yeah. Can you check it out? Let us know.
Yeah, sometimes it works.
Hmm.
All right. So, where do you see this going forward? Like you've already mentioned how far you've already come in 5 years,
Yeah.
and the technology has changed quantumly in what 20, 30 years.
Mhm.
Where do you see this going in the next five?
Next five. No, what's really hot right now and what's really picking up is these international searches. And
Ah,
I'm getting a lot more requests for people who went missing internationally. So it's finding the best way to move forward with those, I would say.
so
You know,
Canadians that have gone missing while they're traveling?
yeah, while they're
Okay.
traveling, or maybe it is a family member, like the family may be like, let's say in England, but their son has come to school here, right?
All
And
right.
now they can't locate their son and he's gone missing. Um, Interpol has started an international database called
Oh, wow.
iFamilia. And
Nice.
so it kind of works out the same concept as ours nationally, but at the international level. It's huge in Europe, because those countries, people can pass through multiple countries within one day, and there's not really a tracking system for that, right? So the European countries will submit to iFamilia, and then that way they know that's being searched against all other cases within their area, right? So
Very cool.
that's, yeah, something we need to look at and see, you know, what's the best way of utilizing that database. So
Right. Huh.
you
Yeah.
never know when something's missing, you know, use whatever is at your fingertips to try to locate the missing item. So
Yeah.
I don't think missing persons is any different.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, that's just it. Like we've got the technology and
Mhm.
we just got to use it and make it work for us.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's just it. You don't know what you don't know. So it's difficult to, I guess, ask for specific help if you don't know what that specific help is. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to talk to you about this is because I didn't even know that there was this DNA bank data bank program going on. I knew about the missing and unidentified remains, but I didn't know about this other part of it.
Mhm.
And like I said, sometimes you just don't know what you don't know.
Right. Right. Or have to experience it to kind of get away with,
Right.
you know, kind of cultural thinking. And you know, we did have some provinces where the police officers were like, the person went missing here, we're gonna find them here. And I'm like, challenge taken.
Right.
So I'm gonna, when I get that interprovincial link happen, then yeah, for sure that's a win for me in the sense that I can say this is why you need to come national. Don't stop at the provincial level. You need to move on to bring it up to national.
That's just it. Yeah, you never know. The unexpected can happen.
Yeah, that's it. And I see it as a safety net. It's just an additional safety net that's in place and can catch these things, right? So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. All right. So, is there anything that we haven't covered that you want to touch on?
um, I think our messaging to the public, when I'm speaking to the public, is we really need the two sides of the stories to make that link. We need the missing persons and we need the unidentified remains story. And we get the unidentified remains from investigators and medical examiners, coroners throughout Canada. But we see that we're not always getting that missing person report. And we're really seeing that now with IgG in the sense that our investigative genetic genealogy, in the sense that the ones that I know of that I have been following and they've been identified, they were never reported missing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that really needs to be the take home, is that if you have a loved one who you haven't seen, who you can't get a hold of, please make a report to the police of jurisdiction and get them up into the database.
Okay, good to know.
Because I know to date we've always run with about 700 unidentified remains. These 700 we need to identify. There's got to be some people who
There's got to be some people missing
that just
Yep.
need to be reported so we can make those links to these unidentified.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's too bad that those unidentified remains, you don't have any data on whether they're scavenged or not, because I would really like
Yes.
that information. That's the information I want to know.
Yeah, I don't, and that's not, unfortunately, that's not something we go into because that's more,
I know.
the investigator side of the house. So
I know. I'm going to keep asking for it, though, because it's my wish.
yeah, no. If
Mhm.
it's items that we see that the investigators need to know, it's definitely something we'll look into. But yeah,
It is what it is, Ingrid.
Yeah.
I understand.
no, and
We
you know what?
can't all have everything.
It's funny because until I talked to you, I really haven't talked to anyone who's looked at the scavenging point of it, other than I know because I've had a few cases where, dogs are bringing home
Mm-hmm.
bones from the woods and
Yep.
bring them home to their dog parents, and then they're calling police about it, which is, to me, like totally different. I'm here in Ottawa, would never even think of that, right? But my brother-in-law, who lives out in BC,
Oh, yeah.
he's got 3 dogs who just go into the woods, disappear for half a day, and then come back with these bones. And I'm looking at them and I'm like, are you sure none of these are human? And that's where my mind goes, which is terrible.
Yep.
He's like looking at me going, no, they're animals.
Okay, just so we're sure.
Yeah.
Hey, I hear you. That would be my first question, too. Got to check them out.
Yeah. So, but yeah, Canada's so vast and there's so many different things that can happen. It's incredible. Like even the waterways. I know I've heard a lot of like Red River or Niagara, and just doing that, check of the waterways to see if any remains have come to surface and that. So we've got a lot of water here in Canada, and that's where a lot of people can go missing for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And people can go missing in those remote contexts. It doesn't have to be criminal. People can get snowed in, and they'll leave their vehicle and they'll just get caught out and die of exhaustion.
Yeah.
Or exposure. There we go.
Yeah.
No,
a lot of scenarios.
Yeah, a lot of scenarios in this very big country with a lot of remote areas. All right. Well, thank you very much for this wonderful conversation. I'm just so tickled that we finally had a chance to connect and talk about this. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for coming forward, and I'm glad we were able to chat about it. Like I say, it's a service for the people of Canada, and if this is your situation, by all means, speak to the investigator of your files and get that story in, so we can start working on making some possible connections.
Right. Yeah. Everybody should know about this service.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to learn more about consulting archaeology in Canada, and not that romanticized version you see in Indiana Jones, although who doesn't like Indiana Jones, then consider picking up my book, Memoirs of a Reluctant Archaeologist, available in print and ebook from most major booksellers. I hope you've enjoyed listening to this episode. Please leave a rating or review and share this episode and podcast with your friends, family, and colleagues.